All right, man. We're here.
Yes, we're here.
Yeah, man. You know, the last time I saw you, it was at the beginning of the war.
Was it? I think it was a couple of days before the day of all days.
It was, right? It was like actually, you're right. The war hadn't started yet
Yeah,
when we first hooked up and I interviewed you, and it never came out because everything happened with the war. But I think this is a better setup than what we had before. We were at the offices of the Kyiv Independent when y'all was just setting up.
yeah. I remember that empty office a couple of days before the war, um, when atmosphere was essentially moving to something that was resembling us a doomsday, and we chatting, talking, light conversation. I remember you staying with us at the Kyiv Independent office, hanging out with us. It was last nice days before the day of all days.
That's a different world, man. I don't think people who aren't here can't appreciate the difference between what the atmosphere and the mood like was before the war and then afterwards, because everything just went fucking crazy, you know?
Unbelievable. And what was especially hard for me is that uh, in those days, 3, 4 days before the invasion day, we were almost 99% sure it's going to happen. And it's so hard for people to force themselves into accepting this fact that everything that we have, all these nice things of the happiness of everyday lives, seeing guys from work, coming to morning, seeing those faces, doing what you do for life, seeing the streets, seeing people in the streets, peaceful normal life is going to be gone forever. So it's so hard to accept this in your soul, that this great injustice is going to happen. This beautiful life, this normal life that we all deserve, is going to be gone forever. So it was really hard for us, for instance, in the uh, last night before the invasion. It was really hard for us at the Kyiv Independent office to just say goodbye to each other and leave for going to bed at home, because we were getting ready for the day of all days. It was really hard to say goodbye to normal life that we all deserve.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring it up as a Ukrainian, because as a foreigner who was here and who decided to stay, and everybody who decides to stay, we have a personal connection to this place, even though we're not from Ukraine or grew up here. And I think the toughest part I think we all could share is what the fuck is going to happen, right? We knew that there's going to be resistance, but you didn't know how that story is going to unfold. And when you say those goodbyes, it's ominous because you don't know what's going to go down.
I expected the worst. I expected things to be even more brutal than what we ended up having. I mean, just the Kyiv episode, the Battle of Kyiv. I expected a very long guerrilla war in which the Ukrainian military would be defeated quickly, but resistance would go on. This is what I was thinking about. And eventually, I thought that it would turn into a sort of a guerrilla war that would be unwinnable for Russia. And this is the way it would fail, in my imagination. So life brought us a lot of surprises in this regard. So yeah, when it comes to foreigners, by the way, I remember you deciding to stay in February 2022. And there was, the community of foreigners living in Kyiv, expats. It's numerous. There are lots of people enjoying life in here, even not right now in wartime, especially right now in wartime, because I totally, as someone who has worked for like a decade with foreigners interested in Ukraine or living in Ukraine and working in Ukraine. So I totally see a lot of people, foreigners, foreign nationals, who absolutely relate to Ukraine, who absolutely understand and feel this story of a nation that's been struggling for existence, for getting a better life, succeeding in life, pursuit of happiness. I know hundreds of people who deeply relate to us. And there was so many people staying here saying that, no, there's no way Putin will make me leave this place, because I love this. I relate this. I feel it this way. And there was a lot of people who had to leave because of regulations at their workplaces or something like that. So they were forcefully evacuated, for instance, and they felt so bad about this generally. I remember a lot of my friends, for instance, some of my German friends, they were telling the world on social media, for instance, that they have to leave Ukraine because they have to, and they were almost trying to ask for forgiveness about this. So they felt really sorry to leave this. That's how deep you can relate to as a foreigner here in Ukraine, and I absolutely understand this because the whole story of Ukraine and everything that's been happening here for the last decade, it's so understandable to basic human decency, to everybody who has this basic human values. So it's totally relatable to anyone who's of good faith from anywhere in the world. Any decent human being would understand Ukraine if he or she really looks into it.
So when you talk about the foreigners and like this thing about people understanding Ukrainian just on this human level, one of my best buddies, Andre, he's from Kherson, and his family is currently under occupation, right? And so one of the first things he did was that he got his family out of the country. He stayed, and he joined the territorial defense. And so he's from Skadovsk on the seaside, and I've been to his home. I've met his family. And so I've been coming to Ukraine since 2008. So it feels like family to me. And I took it very personally when this happened. And so I felt like I was quitting on Ukraine if I was to leave. So I said, I'm going to stay. I wasn't connected with any organization, so I had the freedom to stay, and I chose to. And I grew a personal bond with Andre, like a brotherhood, because my first experience covering a war was with somebody who I genuinely loved and cared about, and somebody who was looking over me even as he was carrying an automatic rifle defending his country. He was in Brovary with the territorial defense. And so I had that experience of seeing things up close. I was almost killed by a MiG that came down and it ended up killing about 4 people in our territorial defense unit. But you have far more experience covering war than I do, far more intimately. And so I just want to ask you about what it's like. When did you start covering the war? Did it go back to 2014? Because you're from Donetsk. So you have this experience with the Russians occupying your Oblast, but then I know that you were deeply involved in covering the war in 2022. So just tell us about that.
In Ukraine, there's a generation of people to whom this entire story, the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian endeavor to get better in life, to survive and be a better place and thus survive, it has become sort of a lifetime thing for so many people here. And I happen to belong to this generation because, it's, the Russian invasion, generally the big war with Russia, it's continuing for about a decade now. So it means that if you are 30 years old in Ukraine, it means that, third part of your life, took place amid all those things, and it goes far broader than just the decade of war since 2014. We had tensions with Russia dating long before that. So to so many people here, it was about fighting a war, joining the military, or working for the government, or trying to reform the government, or pursue reforms, anti-corruption, reforms in the military, journalism too, and communicating with the outer world, such as myself. To me, the war started. The hot war started on the spring day of 2014. I think it was April of 2014. I was living in Mariupol. I was just a student. I was 21 years old.
And that's Mariupol. For people who don't know, that's where the Russians are currently occupying in one of the major cities.
The city of great tragedy by the Azov Sea. So I remember a moment when there was a day when we came to our university for yet another lecture early in the morning, and the lecturer told us to leave for our homes, get back to our homes, and to be as careful as possible because something really bad is brewing. That was in the beginning of this turmoil in Donbass with Russia sending their proxies. So it was brewing. The Ukrainian military and police units, they were trying to respond with this upheaval supported by Russia. So, and our lecturers, our university staff, they asked us to get back home and to possibly see the girls off, to make sure they are secure. And I was seeing off my girlfriend, my then girlfriend, and public transport was off by that moment. Mariupol was one of the centers of this tensions, of this brewing, growing storm. And I remember walking down one of the main avenues of Mariupol, and I saw something that I later learned is called howitzer, artillery piece. That was the Ukrainian artillery piece. And on that very moment, this word came to my head. The word is war. It's a war. So ever since then, it's present in our lives.
How old were you then, by the way?
Sorry?
How old were you?
I think I was 21. Yeah, I was 21. I was in April 2022. 2014, sorry. So I started, for several months in 2014. The Ukrainian military was not in control of the city. There was no Ukrainian authority in the city. No police, no fire service, absolutely no one. Anarchy, total anarchy, and Russian militants were in control of the city center. Administrative buildings. So they had barricades in there. So there was a lot of armed people first in there, and the rest of the city was in complete anarchy for much of the springtime and also of summertime 14. So there was anarchy in the city. And I remember, for instance, there were moments when people from factories, Mariupol was famous for its metalworks factories, very large industrial monsters. And people, usual workers, they would self-organize into some sort of a, guerrilla units, who would ensure the security of their own communities against looters, against many bad things. So there was anarchy. So I think that was the moment when I started doing some sort of first steps into journalism with this war stuff, because since I was a student in international relations and also English, I started, we were always into, foreign media and, talking to foreigners and stuff like that. So particularly it was about BBC. And since Mariupol was one of the epicenters of those tensions in Mariupol, so BBC people would get in touch with, people on the ground. And it happened to be me at some point. So that was, I think it was BBC World Service, something like that, radio, the World Radio. So they got my contacts. So they started calling me sometimes at 4 a.m. For like brief interviews. So here's the guy on the ground in Mariupol. He will answer a couple of questions for us at 4 a.m. Why not? So I think that was the first sort of a steps.
How was your English in the time talking with these people?
Well, not as good as now. I'm not saying my English is good right now, but it just happened to be that I have always been interested in talking to foreigners, especially when it comes to some serious people, because I'm a village guy from Donbass. I grew up in a small village with not many chances to succeed in life other than, get an education at your own expense or at the expense of the government if you study hard enough. So I'm just a small town guy who really wanted to see something big in life. So naturally, one of the ways out of our small town in Donbass was learning English. And since I grew up in a poor family, so you do it yourself. You don't have money for this. So if you want to succeed in life and you want to do something better than working as a laborer at the factory, at the local factory, we had like a chemical metalworks factory. So you gotta work it yourself. So one of the things that I did was English. Well, it was okay enough for me to get interviewed by BBC service back then. I'm not sure. So should
Yes,
be.
it's interesting. So you grew up in this small town in Donetsk, and I'm curious because everybody, when you talk about Donetsk in the east, they're saying, "Oh, Russian language is banned there, and there's this big civil war." So, as somebody who grew up in Donetsk, tell us the real story, man.
Well, it's an interesting place. I mean, it's something that we call Donbass. Let's call it Donbass in a broad way, which is the industrial region of eastern Ukraine. Um, the United States have this place that you call the Rust Belt of America. So something like that constitutes Donbass in Ukraine. It's a region that has a very long history in terms of production, industries, coal mining, by the way, is super important. It has a long history of rising from nothing. Those lands were uninhabited for quite a long time, and turned it into one of the greatest industrial centers of Europe. But at the same time, it has a history of collapse, of degradation, of withering because of many circumstances, such as the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Soviet military production too, and in general the change of economy, the major changes of how the world works, how economy works, and this giant monster with the insanely giant industries, with insanely giant factories, plants, it really struggled for the last decades. Really struggled to find a place in a new world of capitalism, of competition, of fierce competition, of technology quickly expanding and rising. So a lot of people, because of the economic troubles, a lot of people would lose their jobs. A lot of people had the living standards lowered. At the same time, Donbass have always been a proud place, a place where people are really proud of their status as it has always been since the dawn of Soviet Union. It was a place of working class heroes, let's go this way. So, and in the new life ended up being much more complicated because of objective reasons. Also, it's a place where so many people from many corners of the former Russian Empire or Soviet Union would come to work and get jobs at new factories, and thus they constituted the population, the new population. A lot of Russians, ethnic Russians, coming to those places for jobs. A lot of Ukrainians, ethnic Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians come there. Serbs, too. Greeks, too. There was a huge community of Greeks who were transferred from Crimea to those places. Yeah. So in many ways, it's a very multinational environment, in which as it always happens in Russian-dominated parts of the world, in which cities speak Russian because that's the way empires work, and rural areas speak Ukrainian, or the mixture of Russian and Ukrainian. And one of the things, and probably one of the things that Lex Fridman didn't like about me in my interview, is that I told him that people in Donbass, they largely speak Russian. I speak Russian. Russian is my mother tongue. It's my first language. And there are two very important things that many people do not understand. Is that many people identify people of Donbass as Russian because they speak Russians. This is not true. People speaking Russian, even people who are pro-Russian, but nonetheless, they identify clearly themselves as Ukrainians. So they just speak Russian. It just happens to be that they are Ukrainian speaking Russians. They have Ukrainian last names, traditional Ukrainian last names. So they clearly identify themselves as Ukrainian. They might be huge fans of Vladimir Putin or something that they saw on TV as Vladimir Putin, but nonetheless, it's it's a starting fact for them that they are Ukrainians. And for instance, we have a lot of people with Russian family names, lots of them, but nonetheless, even people with Russian heritage behind their backs, they also end up identifying themselves as Ukrainians, or identifying themselves as part of the Ukrainian nation, as a political nation, which is not necessarily about ethnicity. So it's the fact that people in Donbass speak Russian doesn't mean they're Russians, because this is not the way they think about themselves.
It's interesting, man, because we're going to get right into it, because this Lex Fridman guy, he has such a large following, and I quite frankly think that he doesn't know shit about Ukraine, which is perfectly obvious, but you would know more than anyone because he did an interview with you that he never released. So what's up with that? Why wasn't it? Tell us about how that interview came about.
So I think it started in springtime. I'm not sure
of this year
exactly. No, I mean the initial interview. The initial interview happened in springtime 2022. The hottest year.
That
was 3 years ago. It was not yesterday.
Wow.
Not. I think there was one of his, assistants who got in touch to me saying that the guy whose name is Lex Fridman wants to interview me, and also several other Ukrainians. I didn't know who. And that was one of many, many interviews that we did back in the day.
So you did more than one with him?
No, just one interview.
Okay, got
just one interview. But he did at least one interview that we know. It's with the Minister of Digital Transformation.
Yeah, I know who that guy is.
Yeah, Mikhail Fedorov. So that was just an interview, one of many that we did. As Ukrainian journalists responded to so many media outlets. TV, newspapers. So back in the day, we had dozens of interviews. So many of us. Guys in the Kyiv Independent, myself included. We had. I think we had an interview a day at least, or going live on TV on CNN, MSNBC, BBC. Luckily, we had a chance to speak up and talk to the world on this, and the world was listening. And that was one of the interviews. So it happens in a hotel in downtown Kyiv. So they rented a huge conference room for this with all this equipment. It was nothing like just impromptu conversation or something like that. Sometimes foreign journalists would come to Ukraine and meet with us just to get themselves involved, get some answers to questions just for their further work. But that was like full-fledged interview. It was long.
How long was it?
I'm not sure, but it was about 2 hours.
Okay.
Maybe more.
Okay.
It was. And of course, I answered all the questions, and it ended up going nowhere. So we took a picture. So I didn't know who Lex was at that point. I just Googled him when I got invited. I see that this guy seems to be a big time, someone big in America, but we never heard about him, honestly. Even though we are kind of present in the American media space, let's go this way, but I never knew him. He was something big, but nonetheless, we did it. Okay, we took a picture together, and it went nowhere. So I tried to check a couple of times. So are we having this interview? Should I post it online? Should I share it for people to see? But there was not a word from Lex or his people. I checked a couple of times on the new interviews that he had, nothing. So essentially that was it, because we were super busy. That's the first year of the invasion. It was super busy time. So to be honest, I had really had no time to bother myself investigating this thing, why it was never published.
What did he ask you? I'm interested in that. Like how did he open up the conversation with you?
Essentially, what I remember is that it was more about things that we started discussing before switching to Lex Fridman. The life in Donbass, what is Donbass, why it's. I remember explaining this to him too, that people who speak Russian who live in Donbass, they never identified themselves as Russians. It just came with Russian propaganda, and they trying to persuade people into this, that Russian-speaking Ukrainians are Russians. They are not. They simply do not identify themselves this way. So I remember getting asked about things like, but you clearly believe that there were reasons for this upheaval in Donbass, for this for the creation of rebel forces in Donbass, for pro-Russian sentiments in Donbass. And I'm saying, of course, everything that happens under the sun has reasons, have historical reasons. And I explained this to him, that we have a long tradition of many people sympathizing to Russia. We have a long history of Russia obviously exploiting the problems of Ukraine as a national state. We have a history of Russia presenting itself as a better alternative, as a wealthy state with lots of oil money just falling out of their pockets, of island of stability, as opposed to this messy Ukraine. We have a history of Russia presenting themselves as the better alternative to this mess, to this economic troubles, to this political instability, and so on and so forth. So obviously there was a lot of reasons, social, economic reasons, also local problems. Donbass is one of the worst places in Ukraine in terms of crime, organized crime too. So there are lots of reasons behind this. Everything, this whole thing is very complicated.
And so, you were trying to make it, okay, it's complicated, but then how was he receiving what you were telling him?
He was saying, oh, hey, okay, oh, I see. So there was no attempts to challenge me or something like that. So he was like, okay, I see.
But his questions, did you feel like, because I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking about the Zelensky interview, and well, I'll ask you about that. But he spent 2 hours with you, and did he ask you if you want to do the interview in Russian? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently he's perfectly capable of doing interviews in English for English language audience. So getting back to your questions about Russian language in Donbass, and I think we also discussed this with Lex too, and I explained to him with my own example. For instance, we in Donbass, we had quite a extensive autonomy in terms of education. Schools, universities. For instance, since my first grade, we had Russian language. We studied Russian as the second language, along with Ukrainian and some foreign language. In my case, it was English. So we had Russian literature, along with foreign literature and Ukrainian literature. So most of Ukrainian schools were Russian. You essentially, when you send your child to a school, you can choose between having the Russian class or having the Ukrainian class. Some people did choose Ukrainian class because they knew that they live in Ukraine. They want their children to be fluent in Ukrainian, so they. But nonetheless, even in Ukrainian class, it was just about the language of the process. It doesn't mean they did not study Russian. Same goes about university education. So I graduated a very cool university, even though it was not super prestigious in Ukraine. Mariupol University, it was really cool, and I graduated it with saying little to no of anything in Ukrainian. So we had lectures, most of the lectures in Russian, because it's just the way it is. We're in the Russian-speaking region. We obviously had like our yearly essays in Ukrainian, because again, it's the official language of this country. But at the same time, most of the lectures, like things like we had in the university, also in Russian. Mm-hmm. And essentially, all those things, all this language tensions, in many ways it happens. Russia is to blame for this, because by unleashing one of the worst wars that Europe have seen over the last centuries, and making Russian language one of the symbols of this aggression, of this war, of the expansion. They in many ways turned so many people from Russian language and from Russian culture. So they made it as in the center of the hatred. They made it the symbol of all the evil that happened in the world. So if someone wants to tell us that Russian language in Ukraine is hated by many people, I'm saying that and Russia is to blame about this. So they gave a lot of people the reason to really dislike Russian language and associate Russian language, Russian culture with what Russia has done for us.
When I first came to Ukraine in 2009, I came on a Fulbright student grant, and interestingly enough, the U.S. State Department paid for Russian language classes. They didn't pay for Ukrainian. And then, I was based here in Kyiv, and everyone spoke in Russian to me freely, and Ukrainians were speaking to themselves in Russian. Now, when I would make trips to the West, if I was in Lviv, for example, my Ukrainian friends, they just switched to Ukrainian, and there was no problem. They just switched. Yeah. And then, as for me, if no one understood English, they spoke to me in Russian regardless of it. Like, it was never a problem. And so it was only after this 2014 invasion, you saw all these propagandists, many of whom are operating in the West, that were talking about this ban on Russian language. And as somebody who been living in Ukraine since 2009 and who started learning Russian first, I'm like, where are you all getting this from? Because you must not live here. And, and so, and it was really funny when I was watching the interview between Lex and Zelensky. You remember one of the first things that he said was that the Russian language is banned here. If you remember, they said the Russian language he said that directly, and Zelensky said that's not true. But that has to piss you off, man. It has to piss you off.
I have so many emotions about this, to be honest. This whole language thing. It's true that before 2014, Ukraine was much more Russophonic, much more Russophonic, particularly when it comes to the city, Kyiv. I'm not saying that a lot of people just suddenly forgot Russian language or stopped using it. Many did, at least when it comes to the public space, social media, for instance, because in the present time Ukraine, especially when it comes to the period after 2022, it's a statement to switch to Ukrainian language. It's a statement, it's a symbol, it's your message that Ukrainian language is something that unites us. Ukrainian, many people who were 100% Russian speaking, for instance, they switched to 100% to Ukrainian because this was their statement. This is them saying that I do not wish to have anything in common with Russia because Russia uses this language as one of the symbols of what it does. Same goes about Russian culture. Same goes about essentially anything Russian that was present in Ukraine. If you go back in your memories to the time that we are discussing, 2008, 2009, and when you think about Ukraine now, it's a different country.
It's a whole different. It feels different. Like just that, it's like the air of it is just vastly different. If you don't live here, like you can't really appreciate like how vastly different this place. Yeah.
And we are just talking about culture.
Yeah.
And we can talk about economy, politics, the way, this interaction between, the authority and the people goes. Ukraine is so much different from this. Yeah. Sometimes, you can have a lot of fun getting back to, for instance, things like old YouTube videos or old Ukrainian TV from that period.
Yeah.
Or for instance, like New Year's Day shows in Russia and Ukraine. Russian and Ukrainian culture was so interconnected in this regard.
And there was there was like on every New Year's, like every Christmas and New Year's Eve, there was like this rush, like this old Soviet movie. Remember them? It was a movie. It was a movie about some guy who wanted to fly to like Moscow, but he ends up in St. Petersburg. I forgot the name of the film.
It's the night before Christmas.
Yes, but it played everywhere, all the time. And I remember that distinctly. So it's these small little cultural details. You don't see that anymore.
It goes after Nikolai Gogol, the famous Ukrainian. We consider him Ukrainian writer who was born in Poltava region, but he considered one of the greatest Russian writers.
Right.
So that's his story about Ukrainian peasant, because he truly loved the Ukrainian lifestyle and traditional values. So he had a lot of beautiful stories about Ukrainian culture and magic of Ukrainian life, and in particular that was his story. But this classic Christmas/New Year stories were filmed by both Russia and Ukraine, with involvement of lots of Russian stars and lots of Ukrainian stars, and this New Year's Day shows and concerts with Zelensky essentially hosting them along with some Russian star. So Russian culture was so involved, so deeply involved in this, and vice versa. The most famous Ukrainian rock band, Okean Elzy.
Okay, yeah.
Shockingly, it had most of its profits in Russia. It was super popular in Russia. So obviously when it stopped touring in Russia, so it lost a huge chunk of its audience, and also obviously the money too. So and we can talk about this in hours, and the emotional reaction to Russian language, to Russian culture, to everything that Russia represents, is the reaction to what Russia has done after years of this coexistence, of this pretty normal situation when stars of neighboring country is also popular in your country too. And amid all these years, what Russia has done to Ukraine, you should be expecting something much worse than pretty mild bills and laws and regulations in support of the Ukrainian language, regulations that install Ukrainian as the official language and use. Because I think even us, we who are deeply involved in this, we sometimes underestimate the nightmare that had happened between these two countries. So, yeah. When I was listening to this interview, there was one thought that was, spiraling in my head, that some people who are engaged in, covering this war, or, doing podcasts for this stuff, sometimes they do need to get out of the elitist campuses or elitist, residential houses and see some life, just to begin with. Because it really reminded me of a situation when I was, I think it was 6 years ago, and I went to the Democratic Republic of the Congo with the Ukrainian peacekeepers. We had a helicopter unit in East Africa, and they were providing transportation, medical things. So we had a base in one of the most dangerous parts of this planet, East Africa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ebola fever outbreak, fighting for mineral resources in that part of the country. So it's one of the most destitute parts of the world, unfortunately. So I really tried to imagine what would be reaction if I came to Congo. We were based in the city of Goma, in Eastern Congo, just at the border with Rwanda. And I tried to imagine the situation and the reaction if I came there. And I tried to interview some of the local guys. And I told him, why just can't you have peace in your parts of the country? Why can't you have a peaceful and prosperous life? I mean, why the slums? Why all the fighting? Why all the... because it's a bit more complicated than your childish imagination of what happened to this place. It's about decades of fighting for mineral resources. It's about people getting enslaved to work at these pits, extracting minerals and metals that are used in electronics. It's about fighting in the jungle against local ISIS affiliates. It's about very weak local government army, which is not that different from rebel units and from rebel forces. It's about the long ingrained history of destituteness, of social problems, of slavery, of terrible life in there. It's a very complicated place. It's a very violent place. So, and you come here and asking these people why just came, because it doesn't work this way. And because you have to learn a thing or two about, life and the way that it's not that easy.
I think he's a fucking bastard. Let me be clear. And I'll tell you why I'll tell you why Lex pissed me off. First of all, you're interviewing the president of Ukraine. Who the fuck are you to go to someone's fucking house and tell them how the fuck to speak? It infuriated me. And I would never do that. Just like you brought up the whole point of going to Congo and you're asking them these simplistic, stupid ass questions. It's at its core is extremely insulting. And one, he's not a journalist. Let's be clear. And I don't like talking about people, but what he did was so egregiously bad that I find that he had this very colonial superiority look, just coming from this whole lens of like Russia.
No,
what?
I mean, it's like, I know better.
I know better, right? And he's telling the president, right? It'd be one thing if he's talking to, let's say, even you, or who, it would still be inappropriate and wrong. But you should come in and speak Russian. This is, Russian, besides all of his lies and he was just continuing to try to do it to the president. So we've been interviewing people here over a number of days, and they tell me, hey, I want to speak in Ukrainian. It would never come to my brain to say, you know what? I can communicate in Russian if it's easier for them. Let me do it in Russian. But it takes a particular type of, it takes more than arrogance. It takes a superiority for you to come in and speak to the president of a fucking country and tell them how the fuck to speak.
Well, I do not want to be like aggressively dismissive of a person that is not in this room with us.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I think, the general explanation of this is that many people, they know not enough about this whole thing, about this whole situation. They think that their knowledge is quite enough. They already know it better. So they come and they sometimes they say really weird things that simply shows that you have no idea what you're talking about. Well, so, and you put your standards of nice and well-deserved comfortable life upon a conflict, a war, one of the most complicated and most brutal wars of our time, that has deep roots that are not necessarily rational, especially when it comes to this insane madness that's happening to Putin too, and his ability to turn this into his country's greatest idea and central domestic policy, exterminating Ukraine. So it's much more complicated than simply coming to Ukraine and saying that why can't you have peace? Because like in Africa, like in Congo, in those places where we were, it's much more complicated than your two sentences of what you know about this, unfortunately. Yeah, let's get back to our thoughts to a situation when the military absolutely does not want to fight for the for the country they live in or for the government they have. It's Syria. It's al-Assad Syria. See what happens when the military does not want to fight. It does not consider it's worth fighting for. It's al-Assad what's happening. And just try and compare with what's been happening to Ukraine since 2014. We're not even talking about the full-scale war. Now, in 2014, we were discussing, volunteer battalions. There was about very regular people, taxi drivers, IT people, anyone who formed civilian formations because the military was paralyzed. And they fought with as little as they could have, basically fatigues from hunting shops. I mean, very regular people, self-organized, willing to die, willing to fight. So it's just one minor example of the way it happens. And right now we have a million-strong military force. At the same time, we have seen quite and clear is that when the military does not want for this country, when it does not believe in the country, when it believes that the government or the leadership does not represent them and it's not theirs, what happens is Syria. What happens is Romania back in 1989. It crumbles. I think it really.
Would you say Yanukovych?
Easily Yanukovych. Yanukovych is not a bad example because we are not far away from Maidan, from the Maidan Square, and there was an episode during the 2014 revolution when Yanukovych and his administration wanted to use airborne forces, elite airborne forces, against the protesters here in the Maidan, and the general said no, that's not going to happen. I'm not giving the order for them to go. And when it comes to saying this, things that are in the vacuum of space, things like why not having peace? Peace is better than war. Of course, peace is better than war. But if you are floating in the vacuum of space where nothing else exists without any context, so it's such a criminal oversimplification of the reality. It's such a childish statement. Yeah, of course, and peace is always better, but you should not be thinking that, we have between, continuing to fight for the survival of the nation, we have an alternative that is another kind of good thing. The alternative is something that is much worse. We do not have it's sometimes it feels like many people imagine this war as sort of a soccer game or baseball game in which you can lose, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, you will simply walk out home disappointed, because your favorite team lost. But it's not the way. It's not that simple. If we talk about Ukraine collapsing, and if we talk about Ukraine giving up, we talk about a very huge part of population who would be spotted as Nazis because they are Ukrainian, speaking Ukrainians and willing to be Ukrainian. We're talking about a huge population of Ukrainians spotted as subjects for filtration measures, as they call it. This is what happened to occupied territories. They have filtration camps in which you are subjected to interrogation, examination of your social networks, everything that's your entire biography. Because if you used to work for Ukrainian authorities, if you served for the Ukrainian military, if you were a pro-Ukrainian activist or any sort of Ukrainian activist, you are Nazi, you are the enemy. It's about a very huge part of the population. Especially now in this country. Like I said, we need to, I don't know, maybe there's an answer in showing these people torture chambers. We need to show the mass graves that Russians left behind in their occupation. This is what they do. So it's not that simple. And besides, if we have a situation in which Ukrainian Ukrainian nation and statehood collapses, it's also a very complicated problem for millions of other Ukrainians who would flee, additionally flee outside Ukraine, and who would not have a nation, a government to represent their interests, to represent their part of life. So it's far more complicated than just accept Russian requirements, just cut down your military, just accept this and that and this, and you'll be fine. No, you'll not be fine, because the minute we, for instance, sign up for peace with the eliminated military, you know what happens. For instance, the guy like me, we are 100% sure to be shot back in the head and thrown to the if we are not lucky to flee. So it's much more complicated than that. We're not even talking about things like the Ukrainian language, Ukrainian identity, the decades of all the national efforts to make this country a better place. We're not even talking about the rights of millions of Ukrainians to live in a prosperous, normal European country, democratic country, not in a totalitarian empire obsessed with territorial grabs and war and hatred and all those things that you can see on Russian TV that is propagated as a very normal life, very normal part of Russian life. The worst thing about talking to Putin is that you are giving him a microphone. You are just holding a microphone to a guy who just sweet talks about all those oversimplifications that we have discussing. So just like his foreign minister, so-called foreign minister Lavrov, he will be saying things like, "We have absolutely no reasons to be hostile, to be enemies with the United States. So there is not a single reason for us to be enemies." And it will be just a very generalized phrases and sentences that will simply work very well with the people who are not really interested about this war, who do not really understand the importance of supporting Ukraine. So it's very easy to talk to an average American person and say this: there is not a single reason for you to be spending billions of your taxpayers' money on a conflict that you can even understand or explain in two simple words. Why is this of your concern? So it's really hard to sweet talk about this war and holding a knife in another hand. So it's just I think on Twitter I once compared this to a journalist going to Berlin in 1942 and just holding a microphone to Hitler's rampages about Jews, about Lebensraum, about the warmongers in London, in Paris. It's not journalism. It's simply holding a microphone to another insane warmongering speech, in which would simply cheat a lot of people. Because one of the biggest complexities of this war is that it's really easy to lie, to tell people simplistic lies, that Ukrainians are Nazis, that Ukrainians attacked Russia because they wanted to exterminate all the Russians in the East. And it's really hard to be explaining complicated and long, important truth in this. So I don't see that it works if you simply hold a microphone to another insane speech that is as hostile to humanity as is possible.
I'll tell you, when you talk about the cultural thing, which it requires you to be here to really appreciate, right before the war started, I was in Odessa, and I went to their National Museum. And, at that time, you had the Catherine the Great statue that was up before it was taken down, right? And then in their National Museum, there are these portraits of Catherine the Great and Pushkin. And you know, Catherine the Great is highly romanticized in the West, and Helen Mirren even portrays her, in movies, right? And so, how pop culture can you get then? Helen Mirren portraying like a Russian monarch, and so I remember people were taking photos with Catherine the Great in Odessa at the National Museum, and I was taking these photos too. I never posted them because for obvious reasons, like particularly after the war, right? But my point is that people weren't really, I mean, there were some conversations, but people were not robustly at arms about all of this stuff until this invasion. And I think that's what so many people don't understand. I'll tell you another thing. What really stood out to me from a language standpoint was after the war started, you know, me and Andre and a few of our other friends, we went to his house and we stayed there together because we said if we had to flee, then we would just go together. And so that time, part of the reason why that interview that initially I did with you didn't run, we were so busy trying to figure out how we're going to adjust, et cetera, et cetera. And I was with the territorial defense. But in the mornings, we woke up every morning and they were trying to call their family in Kherson and they couldn't get through to them. And so the agony in their faces of trying to call them, and they were calling in Russian. That's the thing. They were calling and speaking like trying to, and sometimes they would get through, sometimes they wouldn't. And then you would hear these speeches by Putin, and the way that he talked about Ukrainians, like you don't exist, like it, and like this, not a real country, but this derogatory, but also state television and like these derogatory ways in which Russians talk about Ukrainians. And as a Black person, it resonated with me because I'm so, like we have this own history and presence of like white supremacy and ways in which, like the speeches of like governors in Alabama and Mississippi saying that you will never have your equality, you will never have this. Like it felt like it viscerally felt that way to me when you would hear these speeches, because it's all coming from this position of like hatred and superiority over another. And so in those moments when I would hear those radio broadcasts, it really hit me how it impacted Ukrainians.
Sometimes I find it absolutely hard to understand and comprehend in my head. After all these years, I look at that person, Vladimir Putin, at his face, at his face expression. I'm really trying to apprehend the ways he just decided that Ukrainians are not a real country. Ukrainians do not exist because he decided that it's this way. Ukrainians cannot have their own country because he decided that they cannot. He decided that they are not Russians. So I don't know. It's one of the things that I really often think about is that's this scale of absolute arrogance, absolute ignorance, absolute hatred towards the country. He's not kidding. He has done so much for this obsession of eradicating Ukrainians in Ukraine. He has literally slaughtered 200,000 people of his own military in the killing fields of Donbass, in this human wave attacks. He massacred so many people. He has been spending the third year, then the third winter, desperately trying to plunge entire nation into the cold and dark of the winter. He has eliminated his own regular military, one of the largest and the most abundant militaries in the world in the history of humankind. He has essentially plunged the Russian economy into nowhere. He has wasted the Soviet stockpiles that seem to be absolutely ridiculously bottomless for the sake of this absolutely insane obsession with denying Ukrainians of their agency, of their nationhood, of their independence, sovereignty, for the sake of this blind and idiotic revenge on Ukrainians. I think we will have to spend a lot of time in the future trying to comprehend this bottomless hatred and irrational hatred of one man towards a nation, a country, an ethnicity that essentially didn't do any harm to him.
You use the word revenge.
Yeah.
What do you explain? What you mean by he wants revenge?
Yeah. This we have all discussed this fact that the tensions between Russia and Ukraine, with Russia thinking what it wanted for Ukraine, it dates quite long ago. But time and again, when we get back to get tensions between Russia over, for instance, gas supplies, or when we get back to tensions over the control of Crimea, or the tensions over the control of Crimea fleet, this partition of the Soviet fleet between Russia and Ukraine. When we get to so many things with Russia and Kremlin and Putin trying to have full control in Russia, have a final say on over Ukraine, and Ukrainians and Ukraine systemically, time and again, refusing to do so, to comply, resisting in so many ways. There are so many instances of that, and I can totally imagine Putin with all of his pseudo-imperial arrogance, this superiority, this feeling of superiority, just boiling inside from understanding that someone, there's a nation that's not rolling over to him, to his imperial will. He clearly boils down, like he's getting angry about this. He cannot understand the way it works, that someone dares misbehave and ignore what the Tsar wants. He's the Tsar. Everybody listens to him. Everybody obeys him, but not these subhumans who are not really country, who owe us so much. This, one of the biggest components of this imperial superiority is this need to play a victim before subjugated nations, that our empire gave everything to you apes, so you have industries because of Russia, you have like culture because of Russia, we gave you everything and you betrayed us. It's a very normal talking point for any violent empire. So they always want to present themselves as the great sacrifices, without which all these subhumans would not even survive or succeed as a nation. So I can totally knowing Russia, this Russian imperial way of thinking, knowing this Russian chauvinism, I can totally understand this, the way they think about this. They are absolutely infuriated about these apes, these peasants who dare to misbehave and not appreciate their imperial, legacy that came upon them thanks to the high culture of St. Petersburg. So it's totally understandable.
A lot of people, when you use that type of language, apes, etc., like especially in America, and when I try to explain what you broke down, they can't see past that because they look at Ukrainians and Russians as like white people. And so this distinction, which is very clear to me and elsewhere, is difficult. They look at you and they can't see past the fact that, hey, you're indistinguishable from us. So how can you explain to people, to folks who are listening that, there is this difference, and you may not, we're not like their fellow quote unquote white people or Slavs as you may think that we are?
Well, I don't really understand what we're talking about, but the problem is that applying the standards of, or applying the model of thinking that is in America upon other part of the world, which is this Slavic world, as they call it. It means that we are oversimplifying the whole thing, the whole story. So it's not just about the problem of white people versus white people. So it's a different thing, because it's a different part of the human civilization with its own different backgrounds. So I'm not sure that it would be very correct and very right to apply all those things upon this part of the world, because obviously things are very different right now in here. So things are, um, and it doesn't mean that Americans cannot understand why is it so in our part of the world, because actually when you think about this, a huge percentage, if not most of Ukrainians living in Ukraine, they are descendants of Ukrainian peasants who before 1961 were essentially something that in English is called serfs. But essentially, it's been centuries of serfdom, which is not that different from slavery, from American slavery. It was about peasants who are formally, legally obliged to live on this land, to work for the master, for the landlord, to share a giant part of their own crops to this. So they are totally subject for selling, for exchanges as a human commodities. So it's not that really different in many details. It's not really different from the destiny of black slaves. And we're talking about Ukrainian peasants, thousands of them. A very classic example for anybody to Google is the Ukrainian national poet Taras Shevchenko. Taras Shevchenko was a slave, essentially a slave. He was a serf. He was a serf. He was a boy, an orphan boy, living in a Ukrainian village and serving his master from St. Petersburg, with lots of his fellow people paying and working for local landlord in extreme poverty. He was a guy who was essentially sold off from slavery by a lot of people, a lot of influential people, including in St. Petersburg, because they saw a talented poet and a talented painter in that boy, in that serf boy, because they decided that he will simply die as a servant, as a slave in there. And he became prominent. He's everything to Ukrainian culture, and he was a star of St. Petersburg by the end of his life. So he was a classic example. If you want to understand why Ukrainians feel this way, the fate of Ukrainians and Ukraine within this blissful Russian Empire, just one man's biography will tell you everything.
And that also speaks to the fact why Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian literature in these occupied territories are shut down, because it really, because it's anything that speaks to the Ukrainian soul and identity that Putin specifically says doesn't exist is an empowering thing, right?
Moreover, it's not only empowering, it's also, in many ways, it's something that brings you back to your real roots in the context of what's happening. Mm-hmm. One of the most important things that happened to Ukraine and to Ukrainians, particularly to myself, is that we got our homeland back, spiritually, mentally, culturally. Because after having seen what Russia has done in 2014, in 2022, what it has been doing right now every single day, we turned to classic Ukrainian literature. We really started really appreciating our identity as Ukrainians. We started being really proud of this, after what the Ukrainian military have done in this. We are truly, for the first time in our lives, we are truly proud to be Ukrainians. We get back to Ukrainian folk traditions, especially when it comes to this time. For instance, there's a craze about something that we now call the Ukrainian Christmas. It just happened. In this, it's just one of many examples of what happens. We just get back to many old Ukrainian folk traditions that were forgotten by many parts of the world, such as folk holidays, feasts, many traditional things that come from this rural, non-urban Ukraine, from our ancestors. It's about also culture that we discuss, it's now cool to be Ukrainian. It's now cool to be speaking Ukrainian. It's now cool to be investing your effort in Ukrainian culture. It's now cool to be writing and recording Ukrainian music too. Ukrainian. I was terribly shocked knowing that there's a fancy theater a couple of blocks away from this place, and you can buy tickets for like 2 months straight for Ukrainian traditional shows in that, because everybody wants this. Everybody gets back to roots of this. It's just the way human nature works. When you're about to lose something, you really start to really appreciate your nationhood, your ethnicity, the language. Once upon a time, I had a dream in which I was in Russian captivity. And I happened, and because it's just a stupid dream, so I was in Russian occupied territory, so I walked. I was being afraid that I'll be identified as a Ukrainian journalist, so I saw this tension and saw this atmosphere of being under Russian surveillance, of this unfree society. And in my dream, I was like, good Lord, we have Ukraine. We have our own home. We have our own home, which works the way we want it to be, or we're trying to make it work the way we want to be. So Russians are definitely doing what we discuss. They are stripping a lot of people from Ukrainian culture. They are taking Taras Shevchenko away from them, because Taras Shevchenko is this symbol of this pride of being Ukrainian. Because you can't be proud of being Ukrainian. Ukrainians are just peasants with its significant culture, with funny language that is actually not a language but a dialect of Russia. This peasant that is spoiled by Polish. So you can't be proud of this. You can only be proud of being a Russian culture. So Taras Shevchenko is not the guy for you. The story of Ukrainian soldiers who do the impossible things is also not for you. So many epic moments from Ukrainian history, such as Zaporizhian Cossacks, and their so many epic episodes from Ukrainian history. Also not for you, because you can't be proud of being Ukrainian.
I wanted to recite this poem by Langston Hughes, and I think it speaks to our earlier. He's one of the greatest American poets, writers in history. He's a African American poet. But you were talking about the fact that the mere fact that Ukrainians are saying that we're going to censor our Ukrainian language and our Ukrainian culture, of all the things that Russia has done to us, that's the very least. The fact that they are responding to that really shows who they are. And I think it speaks to this, to the line of one of his poems. And mind you, this is written during the 60s. And it goes, Negroes, sweet and docile, meek, humble, and kind. Beware the day they change their minds.
100%. What else did you expect from Ukrainians? After everything Russia has done, after this humiliation of Crimea, after this extremely dirty and lying war in Donbass, in which they were in straight face were denying their involvement, after so many husbands and sons killed in there, what did you expect after we saw Mariupol evaporated, just exterminated with their people? What did you expect as we saw so many tragedies? What did you expect as we were seeing dead bodies being unearthed in mass graves in Bucha? I saw it too. Ukrainians are human beings too. We also have this in our hearts. And I would say that in many ways, the way Ukrainians respond to this, with this rejection of everything Russian, it's still very okay given the circumstances, I would say. I'm not saying I agree with government regulations or many other things that Ukrainian government does when it comes to language policy. But at the same time, given the barbaric things that are happening to this country, it's still very much okay in this regard. And besides, not everything that's written in the law becomes the reality in this country. Yeah. But it's a fact that a lot of those things that many people try to present as the ban of Russian language in Ukraine, it comes from there's a word grassroots. It comes from regular people just rejecting, refusing. My own sister, who was also born and raised in Eastern Ukraine, she switched to. She's, by the way, she's serving in the military. She volunteered to be like a bookkeeper in the military. But at the same time, as almost all of my friends who serve in the military, he switched to Ukrainian too, because, like I said, it's their statement. It's regular people starting to not trying to, but doing this. They put an end to their connection to Russia. The whole thing for me with journalism, by the way, started in many ways because I couldn't join the military in 2014. I was really shy when it comes to joining volunteer battalions, which were not part of the official regular military, but they were self-organized combat groups trying to substitute disorganized military. So I wasn't really sure about volunteer battalions. And because of my poor eyesight, I was since my school days, this is the way it happens in Ukraine, I was considered not eligible for the military because of my poor eyesight. So since I did not join the military or combat formations, so I decided that I want to stand by them. I want to be next to them because we were talking about the generation to which this whole Ukraine thing has become a lifetime story. So that was one of those things that you could do, become a journalist and join the military and writing stories about this war. So this is what I started doing when I graduated the Maryville University. The whole phase of the first period of war, 2014-15, was over by then, and I moved to my hometown in Volnovakha. And I joined a local newspaper, which was simple. So I started doing things with the military. I started making friends with the military, just for the sake of going there and being with there and bringing some sort of a simplistic and a stupid story from there, because I was just doing my first stories about
it's like 2014, 15.
14, 15, 16, early 16. So I really wanted to be there because I really appreciated this. I wanted to be part of this. So one of the things why I didn't, it was one of the one of the ways for me to substitute me not joining the military. So I'm a defense reporter. I'm a war guy. So, and I happened to be doing this until very recently. So
and you were in some shit, man. Like, I don't think people. There's no training. I think there's you really have to throw yourself in it and learn. Generally, like so, and I learned that when it started for me. So how did you know that you were actually good at it? Or like, tell me about some shit that you got into, like, you're like, oh man, did I make the wrong decision? Like,
no. I didn't think I was good at this. It was just for something that I decided that I really want to do. It was something that satisfied my thirst for being part of this revolution and war and just struggle of the nation. And there was something that also satisfied my need to be next to the military. I had never been a fan of military before 2014. Absolutely not my way of thinking, not the way I see myself. I mean, especially when it comes to very imperfect Ukrainian military and post-Soviet militaries and the way they work. But at the same time, the story of 2014, what we saw, what happened, all the blood that was spilled for that tiny plot of land that's Donbass, the acts of valor, of heroism, the guys of Donetsk airport, the epic stories of what they did. It just gives you real appreciation. It makes you appreciate what these people have done for us, and also the contrast between the places where I lived in my homeland in Donbass, the Ukrainian, let's call it the Ukrainian control part of Donbass, and the criminal hellhole that Russians turned Donetsk into one of the coolest cities, one of the wealthiest cities of Ukraine, one of the most fast developing cities of Ukraine back then, a decade ago. It just showed us more than vividly the contrast between choosing Ukraine and choosing Russia. Yeah, Ukraine may not be perfect. It may not be a super wealthy nation, but it's a nation that has a chance. It's a nation in a country that's worth working and fighting for. So I did this. To me, my sort of career as a war guy, as a military and a defense reporter in the field, it started big time when I moved to Kyiv. I moved to Kyiv in 2016. I spent several months trying to get a better job. So I ended up settling down with the Kyiv Post, which was the biggest and essentially the only large English language publication here in Ukraine. And I said, I'm from Donbass. I want to do military stuff. Here we go. We need a defense reporter. Go and get there. And I guess within 2 weeks' time, after I joined the Kyiv Post in early January 2017, the Battle of Avdiivka happens. Avdiivka was one of the greatest fortresses of Ukraine. And there was a huge escalation of hostilities again by the time. So it became my first deployment, if I can describe it this way. The Battle of Avdiivka, my first deployment with a major English language publication. And you have to work all the time, of course. You have to learn how to talk to the military. You don't have a producer. You don't have a fixer. It's on yourself. you do all the negotiation stuff. You do all the organization stuff. You do all the paperwork. You do all the talks, all the negotiations to join the military. You make all the friends. Personal connections that really help you in this regard. So, and also you have to, as a village guy who studied English by yourself, you also have to produce something that resembles a story from the war front on the paper. So,
yeah, what was it like, dude? Like, what was this like when you went to Avdiivka? Did you see some real action there, and like, what was that like?
Yeah. It used to be a city next to really one of the, if not the largest coke coal factories in all of Europe. A very typical working town that happened to be just essentially a road away from Donetsk, the Russian occupied capital of the region. So it became a fortress. It became a fortress city. And every time something really violent erupts along the front line, Avdiivka became one of the epicenters of fighting, which means that city is relentlessly shelled, which means no electricity, no water supplies, the rattle of power generators everywhere, people trying to get warm with this, with intense, lots of police in there, lots of stray dogs in there, lots of volunteers and also government services bringing food, hot water. It's something for about 30,000 local people to survive with. So, and just in the southern part of it, there was something that was the industrial zone, and it was a legendary place. It's called Promzona, literally the industrial zone. And the Avdiivka Promzona was a super iconic place. It was the place where the Ukrainian soldiers defended for years, up until the fall of Avdiivka in January 2024. It was something that something that looks like a bunch of ruined garages, factories, just industrial capacities in which there was a just close quarters combat against Russians.
And did you see that? Like, did you witness all this stuff? And how was it like? So, just what was it like capturing this stuff? Because I know when I first started covering, like when it first started, because every place was kind of like the front almost, and especially when Brovary around Kyiv, and you're like, okay, am I too close? Like, am I gonna like die? And because you don't have a feel for it, man. Like, I just like, what was one of the I would say the scariest moments where you thought like, oh shit, I'm gonna fucking die? Because tell us about that.
Strangely, the scariest moment, I don't know if it was scariest, but the most vivid moment happened in this iconic prom-zona of Avdiivka. But that was not in wintertime, but later on in springtime, May 14th, 2017. We were there with a group of TV reporters. There was a position in the inside a ruined remains of textile factory. I guess it was this way. So the ruins of the building, of a huge building, was situated the way it resembled ribs of a skeleton. So this was the way the position was called, the position of skeleton. And at some point, we were there, just taking pictures, doing stuff, and Russians attacked the place out of a sudden. First, it was mortars attack, and then, all this boom thing that really resonates with your chest. Yeah. This heavy booms and. It's a terrible thing. And I happened to be isolated from everybody else. It was silent, okay, fine. So I happened to get away from the group of journalists who were taking cover behind. There was a lot of sea bags, concrete blocks, boxes of ammo and stuff like that. So I happened to just walk around with my phone and taking pictures. So Russians started attacking us with mortars, and also they started shooting at the building's rooftop, so that it ricochets, the bullets ricochets and hopefully kills someone. This is what they did. And this whole thing starts, the Russians started, pounding the place, and I'm behind, essentially, what stands behind the ricocheting bullets, and the rest of the group is me and the pile of boxes.
And that's not cover at all, so one of the things that because one of the things that you learn is where can a round penetrate, right? So it's like you got the concrete, and then like the boxes that you're talking about, like if it's a 50, those 50 millimeter, like I'm sorry, we did a story, and somebody's father gave us 50 millimeter shells, right? And they're big as hell. And a box can't stop that. You know what I'm saying? And so you're in some deep shit there, dude. Like,
yeah. I'm standing behind that wall of boxes. I have a picture. I have a picture of me just standing behind the pile of boxes and trying to film stuff with my iPhone.
You're fucking crazy, dude. Like,
I have a picture. And the military behind me, they stay behind me. It's like, stay here. Stay here, motherfucker. And I'm trying,
You're fucking nuts, dude.
I'm telling you, I have a picture. I'm having a picture.
But you didn't know what the fuck you were doing, like in the break.
No, I did. I was fully aware. Okay, Russians. It's something that you sign on. It's like if you go there, you have to be,
You have to be. I get it.
You have to understand that
that's part of it.
Something may happen.
Yeah, I get you.
It's your responsibility. It was my choice. It was my choice to go there. And even if something had happened to me, I would never change my decision. So that was something that I loved to do. That was something that made me happy about my life, about what I did. So, but it ended in a very good way. So Russia's fire died down. I'm not sure if if our military responded with this. I did not recall that, but obviously after this, no, there was a fighting. There was fighting that followed there. So I managed to escape back there inside, inside the building. So.
Did you see armored vehicles?
No,
Was
no,
it-
just
so
it
there
was
were no
just-
infantry
just
coming
gun-
in. It was just
no, just gunfighting and some
Okay.
mortars.
Mortars, okay.
Mortars.
yeah.
And we got back to the commander's post inside, inside the corridors of that factory, and we had to sit some time. Meanwhile, there was heavy fighting, and it was totally okay. But at some point, I see that my photographer is not there. Shit. And what do you do in this situation? So I started looking for him. There's a terrible fighting in there, so it's different. But at the same time, I walked among these corridors and asking soldiers, "Hey, did you see this guy with the with the camera? He's got like blue helmet on him in the West." No, we didn't.
Because they're busy shooting.
Yeah, it was a bit- but I found him. He was with a different group who was seeking shelter, so it was totally okay.
Did you guys know first aid and like how to like wrap
Yeah, we
yourselves
did.
up and
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah,
Okay.
we had some training, and also, serious journalists. They try to first they accept some sort of a really, really basic training from the government before you get your accreditation.
Get your copy. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, those who really want to work in a serious way, they also look for opportunities. There are lots of opportunities even now to get some technical medical aid, first aid. So if you are really interested, you'll find a way.
Yeah, I'm interested, man, because like you're unlike most of the people who come to Ukraine. This is your country that you're covering, and so I always tell myself that when I'm talking to people here and I'm talking about the war, you're capturing the worst part of people's lives and how difficult that is. And now this is going to be the third year, going into year 3 of this second invasion, and now you have the West talking about peace deals and things like that, and your village is occupied, if I'm not mistaken, right? So when people talk about ceding land, that means that they're ceding your home where you grew up. How do you feel about that?
My feelings towards this is very normal to any human being who would really know what's at stake in there. Just try and imagine your own home, your own little town, your own, and more of that, lots of your memories, from your childhood, from your happiest days, just stumbled by the soldier boot of Russians in this regard. When we talk about Mariupol, most of the people outside, this community, they talk in dry headlines like Russians occupying Mariupol. But for us, for those who spent like 5 happy years as a university student in Mariupol, it means that all those streets just died in the fire war. The drama theater in Mariupol, the infamous one that Russians bombed and killed God knows how many people inside there during the siege of Mariupol. That was a place where we as students would take girls for dates. There is a beautiful fountain next to that place. When people see videos from Mariupol, all those ruined streets, the smoldering remains of the city, I see the place where I used to work at a bookstore. I see the place where we as friends, with our fellow students, we used to drink beer and trying to run away from the police. So when we talk about ceding lands, it's about so many human lives and so many things that are dear to any human being, and it's really hard to explain this to people who never been in a situation like that, when you have to cede all that's dear to you, to your loved ones. For instance, when it comes to my town, for instance, my mom lives essentially by my side right now in Bucha, outside Kyiv. But we got properties in our hometown. She got 2 small apartments that are bought They were for which she had to work for all of her life. And we talk about, a 60-year-old woman who has got nothing else but those two apartments in their lives. And there are so many people out there who had to leave their entire lives in there. And besides, it's really hard to explain this to people who are never in the territory that was retaken from Russians. For instance, following the Kharkiv operation in fall of 2022, when we came to places like Kupiansk or many other places in Kharkiv region, what did we find? We find torture chambers. We find Russian prisons that they traditionally call podval, where they keep people as prisoners. It's a terrible thing. We find a lot of dead bodies shot by Russians at checkpoints, for instance, because some Russian soldier was scared by this guy moving too fast in his car. So he sends like a handful of bullets to his windshield of his car, and the guy smells terribly already. So, and besides, it's really hard to explain all those things, to people who never saw Bucha when we were getting back to it. The mass graves, the smell of death everywhere, burned bodies, in ceilings. So you're not just redrawing maps by ceding lands to Russians, and setting the motions outside. We must understand that we are giving Russians a chance to consolidate on their gains. We are giving Russians a time to recover. We're giving Russians relief from sanctions because it's peace right now. And we are stripping Ukraine of the ability to at least go on with its military build up, with getting stronger as a nation, because it's a very perfect reason to relax for rest of the world and say that it's peacetime and it's over, so let's get back to our lives. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, so you don't think you'll ever feel secure, with the so-called peace?
Never, I'm afraid. Yeah. Even if we have some sort of a acceptable peace for us in Ukraine, then the day one of the end of hostilities would be the day one of the preparation for the next war. Because if you want to prevent another war, we have a lot of work to do in terms of the military development, in terms of the overall development as a nation. We need to fix a lot of flaws in this country if we want to survive, if we still want a country. I'm not sure where I start. Where do I start? It's about, one of the things that I tell to foreigners as I want to explain Ukraine to them. I'm telling them that there's actually two wars inside this country. One is obviously the conventional war against Russian invasion and the Russian occupation, but there is another domestic war against the dark side of this country, the dark side of this state, of this nation. Everything that drags us down, corruption, deep inefficiency of the state, lack of responsibility, incompetent officials, lots and lots corrupt practices, widespread corrupt practices that are systemic, lots and lots of things that undermine this country. And just example from today's news, the guy who used to be in charge of Kyiv subway system and who was indicted, I guess is the name, who was indicted on charges of corruption, of major corruption. Today, it's in the news that he fled this country with false medical documents, even though he was charged of corruption 2 months ago. He was indicted. He was handed this subpoena, the notice of suspicion, and they gave him a chance to flee this country with false documents. And he is a long list. He's in a very long list of lawmakers, pro-Russian lawmakers, who were caught on corruption charges and who were given a chance to flee. It's one of those things that we are fighting so hard for this decade. It's one of those things that we are trying to eradicate from this country for the sake of just saving it. Because with all those things that are happening, with not a single government official found responsible and incarcerated over corruption charges at the time of this war, despite so many corruption scandals of this, is something that's bring this country down. And we are, I don't know, this generation, this large community of Ukrainians, they are also fighting this war against the dark side of the state for itself. And it has its victories. This second war, this had its victories and also setbacks. So far we're winning, but doesn't mean that there are lots of setbacks.
What, even, with this pressure being put on Ukraine to strike a deal with Russia that we inevitably know is going to fall apart because Russia wants all of Ukraine, what are some security guarantees that you think Zelensky, the administration, is going to fight for in order to kind of really put pressure on the West? For example, I always hear people talk about the Budapest agreement that was just toilet paper, essentially, right? And so now you hear Zelensky and others talking about NATO guarantees, long-term military pacts with Western countries. What will be required? And do you even think that's even feasible?
It's a super complicated question because, for instance, we are obviously focused on NATO. We really want to join NATO because there are little hopes about Russians serving their obligations of peace and something like that, especially in the case where Ukraine gets demilitarized, which means absolutely defenseless to any sort of Russian attacks. I have a bit of a problem with this NATO thing, even though I'm absolutely up for joining NATO. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, this is something that I've been thinking about. NATO is alive. NATO has been a thing for decades. NATO has been a creator of peace for a set of nations for decades because people were truly believing in this. Because people believe that Article 5 is a thing and that it's going to be triggered if something happens, if one of the nations would be attacked. And because of this, thanks God, in places like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Russians are not present. Russians are not bombing Tallinn right now, but they are bombing Kyiv because Kyiv is not part of the NATO. But at the same time, after this story of generally Western officials being so terribly reluctant in terms of helping Ukraine, trying to escape as far as possible from helping Ukraine, doing as little as possible, and assuming as little responsibility as possible when it comes to Ukraine. I do not have the clear answer if they would come to our rescue, if Ukraine part of NATO, if it's Article 5, and they will not tell us that they do not want to die for Kyiv. So
why do you think that attitude persists? I have my own thoughts because, frankly, Ukraine is not worth that much to them. Putin cares more about Ukraine than the West does. Yeah. And but where do you think it comes from, this idea that they don't see Ukraine as worthy of really sacrifice?
I wouldn't say that it's obviously about Ukraine, but I can totally see these people saying the same thing about Warsaw, about Tallinn, about Riga, about Vilnius. Why die for Vilnius? Why die for?
There has to be something there, though. Like, do you think I
think the most generalized answer is that this war is very anachronistic, if we call it this way. It's so irrelevant to the way we live. I mean, we in general terms, to the way life works, the way governments are in our time. So we do not have like wartime leaders anymore. We do not have the people who are capable of not simply obeying what general voters want for the next elections, but in terms of leading, setting goals and understanding what's at stake, and in general, leading their nations through very complicated periods of time. Of course, an average voter would not want to go to war. An average voter wants better social security instead of more defense expenses, especially when it comes to some country that they can hardly find on the map. So it's a job for leaders to explain this, why it matters. But at the same time, we saw like 3-4 decades of absolute peace, general peace. We so far away from this mindset. We are so far away from this very model of how it works when work could happen any moment, and we're so different from the sort of a society that, for instance, Britain had in 1914, for instance, when it comes to defending your country, feeling the part of your country. This is so.
We don't have any. Well, yeah.
But and the greatest problem in this is that Russians are not in this.
Yeah,
Russian leadership too.
yeah, definitely. Like, what are your thoughts about Biden's legacy on Ukraine and and Trump following up with him, who has, even though people have their critiques about Biden, Trump cares. He doesn't particularly care about Ukraine.
Oh, I'm sure he kind of despises Ukraine in many ways, because we were a source of many troubles for him too. But it's not something that really matters right now, these days. It's a different day, different circumstances when we're going to talk about this. When it comes to Biden, I'm not going to lie that I sympathize Biden too, as a human being, as a person, as someone that we owe much, I would say. I would say I don't think that it's going to be breaking news saying that without Biden, without even at this level of U.S. assistance, Ukraine would not exist as an independent nation. At best, there would be a multi-year guerrilla war in Russian-occupied former Ukraine, as Russians would call this way. But at the same time, it's. Today is several days. We're several days away from Biden leaving the White House, so it's going to happen in several days. So it's just a very good time to have some sort of a summary on what he has done. I think his greatest strategic mistake about Ukraine was that he and his team, they tried to cheat with the loss of history. They tried to avoid it in many ways. So you simply, they tried to avoid going full time. They tried to they tried to avoid doing what was absolutely needed to be done in such circumstances, because history wanted it this way. In those circumstances, you cannot reasonably expect to reason with a maniac that Vladimir Putin was back then. I think from the very beginning, their strategy was to provide Ukraine with as little weapons as possible, or do it step by step to motivate Vladimir Putin to get back to reason and stop. They absolutely did not. They really feared the unpredictable fall of Russia and turmoil in Russia as a response, as a result of this of catastrophic defeat in Ukraine. They feared it more than the victory of Ukraine. So they really tried to cheat the laws of history by trying to reason with the beast, by trying to reason with the unreasonable. So that's why we spent 2 years or a year begging for aid outcomes. 2 years, more than 2 years. We had to spend months and years begging for every single weapon type that America gave us. and ended up being at least 1 year late on this, because they probably wanted, okay, if Putin does not come to reason and does not stop this, okay, we'll give Ukrainians this. Some time passes, Putin still does not come to reason, is still not motivated to stop his war in Ukraine. Okay, we'll give Ukrainians this, but not too much, just to give Putin a chance to come to reason and stuff. It's just an attempt to do as little as possible, to assume as little responsibility as possible, and to cheat history by defeating the aggressor without actually doing something about this. So it's just an attempt to do something that's absolutely not the way history works. You can't reason with the unreasonable power that launched the most absurd war of aggression in European history since the time of Adolf Hitler. Reason does not work there. So the only possible way for this was to provide either to participate in the war personally, I mean as a country, or give the defending nation all the tools to get the 100% of job to be done. So, in what's especially painful for me, for many other Ukrainians, is that the Russian defeat in the Battle of Kyiv was a human-made miracle in many ways. Absolutely nobody expected this. It's something that nobody could predict, and it's something that really happened. And the Ukrainian soldiers who did this, they created a unique opportunity, historic opportunity for the entire West, and particularly the United States, of getting this problem solved without a single American soldiers involved. And it is. And the way they neglected this unique opportunity, the way they lost this chance, the way they were stubborn about this, the way they refused to see the reality at every single step, the way they tried to hide behind these major escalation fears without, hide from so necessary and so obviously needed decisions. It's just staggering, to be honest. And what's also painful of this is that in many ways, what this strategy of trying to cheat with history, it also undermines the U.S. effort. We're not saying U.S. did little, U.S. did a lot, but in many ways, what this approach, it undermined a lot of American effort to this.
Yeah,
unfortunately. So I can totally understand people who are somewhat unhappy about so many billions of dollars of taxpayers' money not sent to Ukraine, but spent so that Ukraine could have weapons. This is the way it works. And I can totally understand this, partly understand this, because, in many ways, all this effect of all these billions were undermined by this simple reluctance to do what needed to be done. When it comes to Trump, I think, one of the things that we really learned amid this war is that this mindset of be what may and just do what needs to be done. And when it comes to Trump taking office within several days, I think we as Ukraine have something to work with. So I strongly warn against sort of the doomsday sentiments. I strongly advise against just a very big temptation to give it up on everything, because it's always the easiest and the simplest thing to do. Just say it, fuck it, it's not possible, give it up. With such a mindset, we would not have the country as of now. So we have people to work with. We have a cause. And we're going to work with this, because be what may, and we will have to do what needs to be done. So we'll see. I was talking about, attempts to cheat history, futile attempts to cheat history. What do I mean by saying this is that, we can get back to all those comparisons and parallels between what we have right now and World War II mistakes that led to the disaster. People from that area, they also try to evade the hard decisions and hard ways. They try to cheat history by appeasing Adolf Hitler. They try to feed nations to him in attempt to make him stop. But this is not the way things work. It's not the way history, not the way all those things work. So it ended up with what we have right now. And the same things are happening in many ways right now. People are trying to go the easiest way about the most complicated problems that could erupt in modern history and in modern politics. We have, in the same way, we have lots of decision makers and leaders trying to go the easiest way. Just let's stop Putin by giving him half of Ukraine and by stripping Ukraine of its ability to defend itself, instead of going the harder way and ramping up military production, providing Ukraine with tools, and making Ukraine a victim way too hard and dangerous to be invaded again. So yeah, it sounds a bit more complicated than that. But at the same time, we talk about Biden administration. They tried really hard. They tried really hard to avoid the hard decision, the hard things. The easiest way is always the worst. It never works out. It never works out. So you cannot, cheat the laws of history by trying to reason. Like I said, trying to reason with the most unreasonable man of this century, who did all these things to this. So, as a result, we lost a lot of time. We lost a lot of lives, way too many lives. We undermined in many ways, particularly the U.S. effort in helping Ukraine. And we gave the aggressor a lot of time to find resources, to readapt, find allies. So we are where we are right now today, because we tried to go the easy way.
That was a perfect way to end, but I have to ask this question, man. How is your mental health?
I'm okay. More than okay, because I really know the difference between civilian life. I live a civilian life in the rear. I live in a nice neighborhood in Bucha, and I really, I think I know a bit or two about everyday life of a soldier, of what soldiers feel every single day, especially right now. Lots of my friends are in the military right now. I'm not eligible for the military. So a year ago, I tried to enlist. Not this way, but I completed works on my book, and I had no answer why I'm not in the military. So I decided, since I had health problems, I decided that the military has to decide if they take me on board or not. So I was rejected for a good reason, admittedly. So I live my life. Since I'm not in the military, I'm trying to do what I can do best for this country. I always recall myself, and I always trying to remind myself of the price. Every single day I wake up with the thought that I am infinitely thankful for the military, for every single day that I have in the silence and in peace, and I'm alive. And I try to do as much as possible for this country. So it gives purpose. It gives you clear understanding of what it's all about, what it is for. I know the price. I know the alternative of what happens if we fail, if we cannot pull this through. So it gives you motivation. That's why you keep your health, mental health also okay, because alternative is much worse.
Man, it's a pleasure, man. I'm happy that we finally sat down and we're gonna release this interview. This one's definitely gonna be released.
Thanks.